Adam here for PC Monitors, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the OSD on-screen display menu system of the Dell U2518D. OSD is controlled by pressable buttons on the underside of the bottom bezel. The first thing I noticed about these buttons when I started using them is they're a bit uncomfortable to use because they're quite kind of small and knobbly, and you need to press them fairly firmly to actually get them to function. And I just found that a little bit uncomfortable, especially compared to what I'm used to on most Dell monitors. If you press any of the buttons apart from the last button, which is a power button, and that has a little sort of vertical slit design power LED which glows white when the monitor's on and flashes white when it goes on to standby or is in a low power state. If you press any of the first four buttons, you get a little quick menu. It shows you little icons corresponding to what each button's going to do. The first one there allows you to change to one of the preset modes, and most of these are explored in the review. If you select colour temperature, you can actually change the colour temperature to various different preset values. And if you select custom colour, that allows you to manually adjust the red, green and blue colour channels. Second button along is a source select button, so you can have the monitor automatically decide on the port to use. If you've got multiple things connected, you might want to manually select it instead, or you can select DisplayPort, Mini DisplayPort or HDMI. The third button along is the main menu system. The fourth button just exits this quick menu. The main menu is split into various different sections, as you can see along the left there. The first is brightness/contrast, which does exactly what you'd expect, allows you to adjust the brightness and contrast of the screen. Next is input source, which gives you another means of selecting the input source used by the monitor. There's a colour menu. This allows you to select one of the presets, which I've been through just before. You can select the input colour format, which should be left to RGB for most users, but for compatibility purposes, if you need a YP-BPR type signal, you can select that instead, or you can reset this particular menu to the factory defaults. Next there's display, and that has various different display options. You can change the aspect ratio. You can select wide 16:9, 4:3 or 5:4, so some of them might be more appropriate if you're using one of the different aspect ratio non-native resolutions. Note that there isn't a 1:1 pixel mapping feature on this monitor, so if you did want to display things 1:1, for example in Full HD, you'd have to do that via your graphics card instead. There's a sharpness function, and as usual for Dell monitors, this can be changed in increments of 10, and you can change that between 0 and 100. 50 is a default, 50 is what Dell considers optimal, and I tend to agree with them as well. There's a dynamic contrast function which is explored in the review, and you can only access that in the game or the movie preset, which is why it's greyed out for me at the moment because I'm using the standard preset. There's a response time setting. You can select normal or fast, again that's explored in the review. Smart HDR, also explored in the review. You can disable or enable that if you have the monitor connected via HDMI 2.0. And there's an option to reset this particular menu to the factory defaults as well. Next there's menu, so you can change the language that the OSD is displayed in. You can rotate the OSD if you've got the monitor in portrait, so you can actually read the menu even when the monitor's in portrait, which could be very useful. You can alter the transparency effect, so you can make the menu more or less transparent depending on your preferences for that. You can change the idle timeout period, which is how long the menu appears on the screen after the last button press before automatically disappearing. And you can set that between 5 seconds and 60 seconds. And there's an option to reset things on this particular part of the menu to the factory defaults. Next there's personalise, and as I mentioned, the first two buttons there are actually shortcut keys. I think I mentioned that anyway, I should have mentioned that. So by default the first one is set to preset modes. You can either have it show all modes, or you can have it sort of just display one mode, which you can quickly select. Or you can have it show you the brightness or contrast menu, input source, aspect ratio, smart HDR, or rotation. So there are your options there. So I've just changed this to colour temperature. So now you see the icons change to a little thermometer, which is associated with the colour temperature preset. So if you press that, it just goes into the colour temperature mode. And I find that quite useful actually, because I use the 5000K colour temperature as a low blue light setting. I prefer it to comfort view, as I explore in the review, because comfort view's sort of got an annoying green tint, whereas 5000K is better balanced in terms of green, but still a very effective low blue light setting. So it's nice to be able to quickly activate or deactivate that. And what I usually do before I was just playing around for this video, I'd have one shortcut key set to standard mode, which is the mode I use for my testing and also just in the daytime for normal use. So you could set that to a different key as well. So you've got standard mode or colour temperature, so you can sort of quickly enable or disable a low blue light setting. Nice little feature there. You can change the power button LED so it's off when the monitor's switched on, if you're finding it distracting. I mean, it's a very gentle glow. It's that's not particularly bright. It's sort of low down. You can't really see it very clearly from a normal viewing position. But I know some people are very sensitive to that kind of thing, so you can turn it on when the monitor's on if you prefer. You can change the USB so it's on or off during standby. By default it's off during standby, which means that if the monitor is in its low power state, so you've turned it off, and that can include by using the power button, then you can still use the USB to charge things, or things connected via USB will still function if you've got on during standby, but it does increase the idle power consumption of the monitor just slightly. I mean, it is just a slight increase, but that's why they have it off by default. The monitor sleep setting, that's actually deep sleep, and that is part of Energy Star. If you send your computer to sleep and you find that for whatever reason the monitor is not sort of waking up along with the computer, that might be because it's deep sleeping. So it uses a little bit less energy, which is why it's enabled by default. But if you are having that issue, or you think you're going to send your computer to sleep and have that issue, just disable the monitor sleep setting. I mean, it doesn't use a massive amount of extra power at all. It's just a sort of a fraction of a watt really, but you know, it's just a part of Energy Star compliance that they can enable that by default. You can also reset this particular part of the menu, the personalization or personalized menu, to the factory defaults. Last but not least, others. This has various display information, for example the model number, the resolution and refresh rate that's currently being used, and the display port and HDMI revisions. Although it says HDMI 1.4, I think that's possibly a bit of a bug in the firmware or something. It's actually HDMI 2.0. DDC/CI. It's part of the plug-and-play functionality of the monitor if you wanted to control it using software, for example. Dell Display Manager being an example of that. You can just leave that enabled. It's just for strange sort of compatibility with very old systems that you might want to disable that, but the vast majority of computers will have no problem if you just leave that enabled. There's an LCD conditioning feature, and that just cycles various different colours on the screen. As it says there, it's to help reduce minor cases of image retention. I'd like to add, I have not noticed any image retention at all on this monitor during my time testing it. I've been using it for a couple of weeks now, but all this does is it just cycles various different colours. So it cycles various different colours and that is designed to sort of unstick any stuck pixels, or if you've got some image retention, then that's hopefully going to speed up the alleviation process for that. There's also a little thing there that just says what firmware the screen is using, which is helpful for Dell factory diagnostics, or if you're just interested in that kind of thing. There's an option to reset everything on this particular menu to the factory defaults, and finally an option to reset everything to the factory defaults. So there you have it. That was the OSD on-screen display menu system of the Dell U2518D. Be sure to check out the full review on pcmonitors.info. There's also a link to that in the description of the video, as well as a link to information about how you can support the work that we do.